What's up, Team Tobias? What's up, Literary Lens Podcast? I totally said that wrong, right?
Mhm.
What do I say at
I
the
don't even
beginning of
know.
these?
I'm not sure what your whole shtick is. I forget. I
I
forget.
forget too.
So just make up a new
Um,
one. I think this should be it too. I think you should just leave
okay.
this in and just go with
Okay.
it.
Oh, I know what it is. I asked you the town. So it's What's Up, Team Tobias? What's up, Germantown, Maryland? This is the Literary Lens Podcast with me, Dr. Doom, Ann Rose, Jackie Lipton, and Kelly Dyksterhouse. And we were just talking about when to know your manuscript is ready to send out. Now, Ann Rose, as a author who's about to be published this week, your book, The Seemingly Impossible Love Life of Amanda Dean, is coming out. Launches Friday. How did you know it was time to send the book to your agent?
I mean, for me, it's going to be different, obviously. So Ava and I were talking about this the other day because it's my origin story is basically I was on my elliptical machine, as I always am, and I was having a conversation with her about like what I was doing. And I was like, yeah, you're probably going to hate this thing that I'm working on right now, and I won't send it to you. Don't worry about it. And she's like, well, what is it? And I told her about Amanda Dean, and she's like, no, send that to me. And here we are. So. So it's not your typical story of how you know if something's ready or not to send to your agent. So that's really a bad example, Lane. It's very bad. It's a very bad example.
Kelly, you mentioned you just sent yours out on Query.
Yes.
How'd you get the courage to do that?
Jackie told me to.
I mean, yeah, kind of.
That works.
I do think that there is a process that, if you have critique partners that you trust, and they all think that it's holding together. I think that is really helpful. And then there gets to be a point where you've revised and maybe you're tweaking words instead of concepts and paragraphs and characters. And if that's the point, you're just tinkering, and probably the manuscript is in place, provided you already have evaluated, the structure and the plot and the character arcs.
And the line level writing, right?
Right.
I absolutely love that. That's a very cool way of saying it when you're tinkering with words instead of concepts.
Right.
That's a mic drop you just dropped on all of us.
Oh, great.
Jackie, you're a writer too. What do you, and you've been multi-published. You have a book on publishing law, contracts?
Yeah, publishing law. Yeah. Nonfiction is a little bit different because the proposal you send the agent is as much a marketing document as anything else. Of course, there are writing samples. You include sample chapters. So if I'm doing a nonfiction proposal, I really have to put a lot of thought into, am I really clear what my market is? And am I really clear that I'm the person to write this book? And why am I the person to write this book? And why does the market need this book? I have to think a lot about those things. But on the line level, I also do have to think about, for me, it's usually how do I find my narrative voice? Because I'm moving from, a very academic professorial voice to trying to write something for trade nonfiction. And that you have to have identified your market so you know who your readers are, so you can then create a narrative voice that matches that. There's a lot of reverse engineering in a nonfiction proposal. Well, I was going to say something about something Kelly said, which I thought was really smart. And I think we may have talked about this on a podcast before, but I think it bears repeating and emphasizing and underlining, is that difference between the concepts and the line level and the tinkering. Because I think in the brain of a lot of newer writers, revision means all of that stuff together. And often new writers think revision is the line level stuff, is, okay, well, I've got a plot, I've got characters, now I'm just going to tinker with sentences and word count. And so what Kelly said was incredibly smart, because if you are new to writing, you know, there is a real difference between revising in the sense of re-envisioning and making sure all the parts are working versus line level editing. And I think a lot of newer writers conflate the two.
I think you're right. And I would say probably the number one reason I pass on a submission is that it's just not ready. And it's not that it's bad. And I can see glimmers of really great writing, but it's just not holding together yet. So I think that, I mean, this is a worthy topic to be discussing, but just tools for how writers know. There is it's a great book, and I don't have it in this room. Otherwise I'd hold it up, but it's, I'll Google the title, but it basically is how to revise for each kind of story. First your concepts, and then your plot, and then your character, and taking this through revising your complete manuscript with each of those concepts in mind. I think it's very difficult to, if you have a really important subplot, to revise your manuscript for, you know, solidifying a character arc and looking at that subplot at the same time. You kind of have to revise maybe one at a time. Am I wrong? Maybe that's just me. Other writers?
I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think that some people can multitask and be doing all the things at once, right? Some people's brains work like that, or some people would probably benefit from taking it step by step. So I think that it's nice to have all the tools in your arsenal and just knowing which tools work best for you when it comes to tackling. And each project can be different too. So the tools that you used before might not be the tools that you use on this manuscript, because every manuscript is different.
Everybody, it is different. So the book I was talking about was 7 Drafts, Self-Edit Like a Pro from Blank Page to Book by Allison K. Williams. So just so you know, I think it, especially for newer writers, it's kind of nice to have that handhold through a revision process.
And actually the equivalent, I would say, for nonfiction would be Thinking Like Your Editor by Susan Rabiner, which is pre-digital age, but the concepts still hold true. It's the same thing. It's just how to take your nonfiction proposal piece by piece and do the exercises on each piece you need to do to convince an agent and an editor that you have a marketable book.
So what happens, because we get a lot of books that the people say, oh, this is so ready, I don't want to edit it anymore. Then we flip it open and it's, you know, obviously not ready. I wonder how we can help authors understand the difference.
Well, one really common question, and we've all said it to people, is, because I've heard everyone on this podcast say this, is the story starting in the right place? So many opening pages are not starting the story in the right place. I know Anne has a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm just going to throw it to her.
I mean, I have a lot of thought. I feel like I've already talked about this, though. I don't want to repeat myself, but I do think that starting in the right place is really important. And I do think that the advice that authors are given to start with action is incorrect. So I think that authors should start with what I call character agency. So it's a small, compelling goal that your character needs to accomplish in those opening pages or whatever, that helps us anchor into their forward thrust of the novel while you're setting up the larger stakes in the world around them. And it may have something to do with the larger plot in some way, but it doesn't have to be necessarily directly related to it. So, I mean, I could go into it and explain it in more depth, but that's what I like to say.
I'm curious because you say don't start with action, but I usually tell people you want to start with conflict. But character agency, could you go into that a little bit more? And I'm not being facetious. I'm actually, I mean,
Sure. So it's the idea of having a strong, compelling goal, right? So I love to use the example of the Hunger Games because I feel like everyone has read the Hunger Games. So if you've read the Hunger Games, well, first and foremost, do not start with your character waking up because that is not the right place. However, it does start with there. But what we do well in those opening scenes is we are starting with character agency. Katniss has to wake up to go hunting to feed her family. There's this big event that's taking place later. We don't really know what it is, but we meet Mom and we meet her sister Prim, and they're curled up together in a single bed. And we meet the cat, the literal save the cat moment that Katniss had for Prim, right? And so we're like, oh, Katniss is a good person. Like she's gonna go do her thing and she needs to feed her family, and this is really important. So it's an important goal for her. And as we're going along, she's raising the stakes. She has to now climb through the fence and not get seen. So will she get caught? Will she not get caught? Like, so as we're upping the stakes, trying to figure out if Katniss is able to accomplish this goal, now we're learning about Gale and we're learning about the districts and we're learning about the reaping that's going to take place later, right? So by the time we get to that moment, which is well 50 pages into the book, and I think arguably the inciting incident of the book, which happens so late, right? We're already so anchored into Katniss's story because we want to know if she's going to succeed. We want to know what's going to happen. And then she's like raising her hand, and I assume everyone has read this book. She raised her hand. I volunteer as tribute. We're like, we're in, right? So, but her goal at the beginning had nothing to do really with the event. It's kind of like this outlying goal. I need to make sure in case I get pulled, because my name is in that bowl so many times, that my family's going to be okay if I'm gone. So you already are kind of like, okay, I kind of like Katniss. Like she's a good person. She's doing this thing, and I need to know if she's going to be able to accomplish this thing.
So I think the important thing about that agency is that what you learn what's important to the character.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can learn what's important to the character in the opening scene, and they have agency, they're actively pursuing that or protecting that, then it could be very small, and it could be even a quiet first scene. Actually, I wrote an article about, or a blog about that for this book, which is wonderful. The Last Mapmaker. It's by, here you go. It's the first scene is really she's just standing and observing something, but she's actively trying not to be part of the action and for anybody else to draw attention to herself. That's action too, and it's also very compelling when you realize why. So it can be a quiet first scene, but you learn what's important to her.
And I actually think what a lot of people do is start too early.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Anne did point out that the inciting incident of Hunger Games starts, the reaping doesn't start till chapter 2, and then she doesn't volunteer as tribute, I think, till the end of chapter 2. But Suzanne Collins is originally a screenplay writer. So she does write in a very filmic way where you get the panning of the whole society and everything before you get to that. And it's very hard to translate film type writing to a novel. It's not a, one page matches one page type of thing. So I think even when you look at examples like that, they can be a little bit misleading, because it's kind of like, then people think, well, we have to meet the family and we have to meet the cat and we have to meet the hunting grounds. And you really don't. I was actually critiquing some pieces last week for a conference, and, one of them stuck out as having really terrific writing, but started with background information to explain how the exciting incident came about, and that this character would never have made this decision in chapter 3 if we didn't know all of this background information in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And actually, we would have understood the decision if chapter 3 had been chapter 1 and a little bit of that background had been just sprinkled in as flashback. So I do think when you're looking at, is my story starting in the right place, look at, is it starting too early? How much of that information does the reader need to know in chapter 1? Because arguably we don't need to know a whole lot of stuff about District 12 and whatever. The Hunger Games works because Suzanne Collins had written lots of books before that and lots of screenplays before that, and she really knew what she was doing. But if you're a new author, bear that in mind.
Right. I think I use it as an example just because so many people have read it.
Right, exactly. And your points are well taken, like your analysis still works. But as another thought experiment, you could say, well, what did the reader actually, it did start with her waking up in the morning and talking about everyone in her family. And, generally that doesn't work very well. So, it's the exception that proves the rule.
I do think, though, that you have to understand her relationship for Prim to understand her motivation for raising her hand. So,
absolutely.
I agree.
Well, it would be really silly of you to disagree at this point now.
Yes, it would be. It stomped my feet, but like, you're wrong. You're all wrong.
But I think we should also address a point that Kelly and a bunch of us, well, not me because I wasn't paying attention, had been discussing last week about, and this is not, I'm not dissing authors, and if you do this, don't panic, it's not a huge deal. But when we get submissions through Query Manager or in your inbox, and then the person withdraws it and says, I've revised it, can I send another version? And sometimes people do that multiple times. Now, sometimes that's just nervousness and second guessing. Often it's that you really weren't sure that you were ready when you sent it. But I do think that in my experience, and other people's mileage may vary, in my experience, if you look at the 2 or 3 different versions that person sends, they pretty much give you the same impression of the writer. So I think a lot of the time it's that the author submitted and they felt they were ready, and then someone said something, like someone read a draft and said, oh, this is, and then they're like, oh, I better change this. And it's like, that's not going to make a big difference. Right. But sometimes they're really not ready. So I don't know if other people have different experiences with that.
Yeah, a lot of times they're still tinkering instead of, right?
Right.
I noticed that when that happens, the person usually doesn't send it in again. And it makes me think of a manager I knew in La La Land who never closed to queries, but when people would send him saying, can I submit my script to you? He would say, yeah, send it to me when you think it's its very best. And he always said he'd never hear from those people again. And I wonder if it's because we all have imposter syndrome and think no matter what we do, it's never ready. So I wonder if people, like you were saying, the nerves do get up the courage, send it out, and then think, oh my gosh, I messed up. I have to pull it.
Or maybe they don't send it to you again because you're Dr. Doom.
Dr. Doom. See, I didn't bring it up that time. I was trying to be serious. And you threw it in my face like, you're mad I'm from Latvia. It's not my fault.
Too true.
No, I think you're right. Sometimes I think that does happen. But I will say a lot of times I'll get people say, can I resubmit? And I'm like, sure. And they do resubmit. So I think there's both out there.
Okay. Final thoughts, Kelly?
No, I think it's a hard line for authors to, to walk, because everyone does have that imposter syndrome at some point. So you're never quite sure of yourself. But I think there's a time though when you may not be sure of yourself, but you can be sure of your story and what you've created. And I think when you get to that point, when you read this and you're really proud of it, and you know that you've revised and you've looked at it from all angles and you've done your line editing, you're ready. And it's scary. I'm there. But it's still, it's part of the process.
Jackie?
What Kelly said.
Yeah, we'll just co-sign that. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, Kelly for the win today. You're ready when you're fixing words, not concepts. I'm going to be telling everyone that forever, and I'm going to be telling them I stole it from Kelly Dyksterhouse. So, Anne, why don't you take us out?
All right. Well, that is us for another episode of The Literary Lens with Lane Haymond, Kelly Dyksterhouse, Jackie Lipton, and me, Anne Rose. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. What are your thoughts about opening pages? And when you're ready, like, how do you know that you're ready when you are going out on submission? So let us know. Also, because my book launch is on Friday, you should buy a copy of The Seemingly Impossible Love Life of Amanda Dean. It technically comes out on Tuesday of next week, but my launch is on Friday. So anyone who comes to my launch locally gets the book early. Yes, you do. So kind of fun. And so yeah, there's that. Have a great day, everyone.